I read somewhere there are many ways to do a square lashing, but only one right way. I can't agree with that. We've always got to try new things and retest the old. Even square lashings can change with new technology, or, more often, to suit the needs of the moment. So, at each step, the thought should be, what are we trying to achieve, not, how was I taught to do this? I'll try and say why we perform any step in the lashing, and that may show how the step should be done. It's possible to think of the lashing as a series of knots, but you've always got to consider how each part contributes to the whole lashing. It's no use tying a perfect clove hitch if the hitch is in the wrong place. While working, it can be helpful to work in pairs, one to pass the rope round and the other to tighten. Passing the rope round might be easier if it's held in a coil rather than allowed to be a long snake that wraps its tail round the poles. And a short bar, like a ladder rung, can be useful to help tightening. Take a couple of turns round it to make a direct pull easier, or you can use it as a lever, or even, if you're clever, a windlass. The square lashing described here is suitable for lashing two poles together, provided that they would naturally touch each other, and provided that they're not parallel or nearly so. If the poles are near enough parallel, then a shear lashing would probably be more suitable. And if there would naturally be a gap between the poles that are being lashed together, then the lashing to choose would usually begin with a slip knot round both poles so that you haul them together at the start. And notice that there are several different lashings which can do the same job. So the lashing in the pictures you see here, probably the commonest use on the English side of the pond. This square lashing starts by tying one end of the lashing rope to one pole. Now, if the poles are positioned so that one might be called the vertical pole, I'll call it the leg, and the other the horizontal pole, which I'll call the arm, then the first knot should be tied to the leg just below where the arm is to be attached. Why? So that the knot can start taking the load immediately and anchor the arm in its correct position on the leg. Now note, in this exercise we're tying the horizontal pole to the vertical one, but maybe when you're using it both poles are horizontal, or maybe any other plane. The orientation of the lashing might therefore change. So you can generalize what I say here if you accept that what I call the leg is the pole along which the lashing would be most likely to move if it were loosely tied, given the dominant force most likely to be acting on the lashing. Where I say downward, you can generalize that as the direction in which the lashing would be most likely to move if it did move. So, for example, imagine a horizontal pole resting on a block at each end. So the horizontal pole won't move at all, and the vertical pole that didn't rest on the ground. So your lashing is needed to support the vertical pole. Well, the lashing would still tend under gravity to move along the vertical pole, so that's still the leg. But the lashing would move in the opposite direction relative to the leg, because gravity would be pulling the leg down past the arm rather than pulling the arm past the leg. So in this case the lashing would appear to be upside down. So what knot should be used to start the square lashing? Books all say start with a clove hitch. Well, fair enough, that has stood the test of time, but is it always the best? It's neat, it's reasonably easy to undo afterwards, not in a hurry though, so don't use clove hitch if you need a quick cast off. It has two turns that go round the leg, and they can usually be relied on to give a firm support for the lashing. On the other hand, clove hitch was adopted when rope was made of natural fibres, which generally give more friction than man-made fibres that are used in modern ropes. So you might want to use a constrictor knot, which is more secure, but on the other hand, may be harder to undo. Some people like to bring the short end back across the knot and twist it round the long end for extra security. Lots of the books show it that way. However, if you leave the short end long enough, you might want to use it to finish the lashing, as described later on. And if you don't like my use of the terms short end and long end, I won't be offended if you substitute standing end and working end, or any other terms that take your fancy. If the poles have a smooth finish, then maybe doing a rolling hitch with 3 turns, or a Prussy cow hitch with 4 turns might prevent the knot from sliding down. You want to call a Prussy cow hitch a 4-turn Magnus hitch? Well, okay, that's up to you. And once, I remember, when I had a bunch of novices who'd never done lashings before, but we had to do a lot of lashings and no time, I prepared all the ropes with an eye splice at one end, so all they had to do was to start by putting the rope round the pole and then pulling it through the eye. Now those lashings worked for lifting half-ton cannons up and down a castle wall, so it's not always necessary to get too precious about how you start. However, whatever knot you use, make sure you place it correctly. With a clove hitch, the long end must flow straight out of the knot to pass under the arm. If we say the arm's at the front and the legs at the back, then the crossovers of the knot need to be at the side, with the long end leading out to the front. If you put the knot in any other position, it will start to unravel, or it will slide as you continue with your lashing. Also, the turn that has the short end should be below the turn that has the long end. And then that means as the knot takes the load, it will be squashed up, compressed, rather than opened out. Coming from the knot, the long end passes under the arm, then up in front of the arm and over it, and back towards the leg. It passes on the same side of the leg as the crossovers of the knot, assuming the knot's in the right place. And by this time, you notice, there's no need for anyone else to hold the arm, no need for the assistant to hold the arm, because the rope's already doing the work. Okay, here's a picture of what that looks like from the front. Next, pass the long end round the back of the leg, and then forward over the arm and down the front of the arm. And here again, what it looks like from the front. Now, here's the tricky bit. Pass the rope under the arm and round the back of the leg, but pass it so that it sits just above the clove hitch. Now I call that the inside position because it's between the knot and the top of the lashing. Oh, sorry, yeah, the knot at the turn at the top of the lashing. So, lay it in there nicely and tightly, neatly. Don't leave any gaps. Don't make any unnecessary crossovers, because if you do, the lashing will work loose, or you may not even be able to tighten it up at all. Keep going round, pass under the arm and round to the front again. And when going round the arm, take the turn to the outside position. And at this stage, that minimises the crossovers. Crossovers cause local friction and stop the lashing from tightening up properly. There's another reason for keeping inside round the leg and outside round the arm, as you'll see shortly. Pass the rope round the back of the leg in the inside position, just below the top turn. Pass it over the arm and down, in the outside position of course, under the arm, back to the leg, and that completes the second turn of the lashing. Ah! This picture. Heap of rope on the ground. What's that doing there? Someone should be flogged for leaving that there. Ah, sorry. Back to the lashing. Carry on. Take a third turn all round. keeping it inside as you go round the leg, outside as you go round the arm. And that completes the lashing turns, that is to say, the turns that go round the poles. Now the lashing turns should have been made as tightly as you could. Even so, it would be possible to make them tighter by adding some turns going round the rope but not round the poles. The extra turns are called frapping or binding turns. To get the frapping turns round the lashing turns, a change of direction is needed. Get that by continuing with the flow of the lashing round the arm just to anchor the frapping turns. If you look very closely, you'll note that in this case the flow of that rope took me from below the arm on one side, at the end of the last lashing turn, to the top of the arm on the other side. That was a bit irregular. Well, actually it was wrong, but in this case it was easier to pull up rather than down. Now, don't go back round the leg this time. Instead, take the rope across the lashing turns. Okay, here's a picture of what not to do. Shows a reason why the lashing turns should be inside round one pole and outside round the other. When the lashing was done in this picture, the turns were all placed on the outside position as they went round both poles. So, if you see, they lie so that the frapping turns only tighten the last, outermost lashing turn. When the frapping turns are tightened, the lashings will probably slip across each other, leaving the lashing unsightly and also loose. Okay, here's the front view of our proper lashing again, as it should be. You can see in this picture how the frapping turn bears on all the lashing turns. That means it will tighten them up equally. Now heave the first frapping turn really tight, then make another frapping turn and heave that tight too. Now, don't be fooled by the delicate hold in this picture. At this stage, it's important to keep the frapping turns tight. The corner, made by those fingers, needs to be much closer to the lashing. So, hold that corner and turn the rope round the arm, tuck the end through at the corner, and remember, the purpose of this is to lock off the frapping turns to stop them from becoming loose. So keep it all as close as you can so that the turns can't come loose. Work it tight. Now in effect you've made a half hitch with a crossover right up to the frapping turns. But I prefer to say turn and tuck and haul it tight. Don't think of doing a half hitch and then sliding it up to the frapping turns. Now, in this picture, it's shown loose again, just so you can see the flow. Make another turn and tuck it close up to the first one. Haul it tight, there it is. It looks very much like a clove hitch, but don't think of finishing the frapping turns with a clove hitch, because 9 times out of 10, if you do, it'll be in the wrong place or the wrong way round. Think of it, turn, tuck and tighten, turn, tuck and tighten. And if all that turn and tuck stuff doesn't make any sense to you, then what you could do is simply leave a longer standing end on the first clove hitch and finish by tying that end and the last frapping turn together with a reef knot. You've still got to make sure that the knot is close and tight so that the frapping turns don't get loose. Now remember, it would be possible to finish the lashing turns with the turn and tuck and then use a completely separate rope for making the frapping turns. If you do that, then tighter frapping turns can be made by using a slightly thinner rope. The way to do that? Middle the frapping rope, take the turns round opposite ways and finish by joining the ends with a reef knot, or a surgeon's knot if you know how to do that. Right. Don't listen to the half-taught person who tells you that a reef knot is an unsafe knot. It's unsafe if you're using it as a bend just for joining ropes together. But in this position, it's the knot for the job. And here's a picture of the finished lashing. Got a long end? Well, just do something sensible with it. Tidy it up. Use it to decorate your lashing. Whatever, doesn't matter. Once you've finished the second turn in your tuck, that end isn't part of the lashing anymore. Away you go.